Vyra had never thought she would end up like this. Captured, trapped in a cage. Her heart raced as she looked around at the cold, metal walls of the small cell she was kept in. The air smelled sterile, and the sounds of clanking machinery echoed from all directions. She was alone, but she could hear the footsteps of humans outside her prison, their heavy boots vibrating through the floor. Her mind kept replaying the moments of the attack. It had come out of nowhere. Her peaceful village, hidden deep in the mountains, was suddenly raided by human explorers. They had come in ships, huge metal creatures that flew without wings, roaring as they descended from the sky. They didn't want anything from her people, except for the simple fact that they could take it. Vyra's people had been targeted for generations, not because they were dangerous, but because they were rare. They were a peaceful species, delicate in form and appearance. But their blood was rich in certain minerals that humans found valuable. It had led to them being hunted like animals. But unlike most others, Vyra had never been captured before. She had always been careful. Now, though, she was caught, and it was only a matter of time before her fate was sealed. She had heard the stories, horrible stories, of what humans did to aliens like her. They weren't just conquerors. No, they were worse. They were hunters, and her kind had been their prey for too long. Some of the other aliens who had been taken were eaten, consumed as food to fuel their invaders' cold, emotionless bodies. That was the part that haunted Vyra. She could already picture what was coming. The fear twisted inside her, but she had to remind herself that fear was the enemy. She had to keep calm. Her people were trained to withstand pressure, to remain level-headed even in the most terrifying situations. Still, she had never felt fear like this before. Humans were unpredictable. They didn't follow the same rules that her people did. There was no telling what they might do next. Vyra looked through the bars of her cage, straining her eyes to see what was outside. She could make out the figures of humans moving about the ship, strange creatures in bulky suits, their faces hidden behind helmets. The ship was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was cold, mechanical, and lacked any beauty. It wasn't home. She wasn't sure if she'd ever see her home again. A door slid open, and Vyra's heart skipped a beat. She forced herself to breathe steadily. A man stepped inside. He was tall, even by human standards. His dark eyes stared at her with an intensity that made her uneasy. He was wearing a flight suit, the same as the others, but his presence was different. He didn't look like the others who had taken her, who had been rough and violent. This man had an air of calmness to him, even if it was a calm that hid something darker. "You're awake," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. Vyra didn't answer. She wasn't sure what to say. What could she say to someone who had taken her from everything she knew? "I'm Captain Marcus," the human continued. "You're safe here for now." Vyra scoffed quietly. Safe, she echoed in her native tongue, but she didn't expect him to understand. He didn't seem to. "I'm not safe here. You humans never leave anyone safe." Marcus tilted his head. "I know you must be scared, but I'm not going to hurt you." Her eyes narrowed. This was the part where they always lied. Every time. The hunter always said that. "Not going to hurt me," she repeated, this time louder, her voice filled with sarcasm. "Then what do you call this? I'm your prisoner, locked in a cage." Marcus was silent for a moment, but then he stepped closer to the bars. "I know what you're thinking," he said quietly. "You think I'm going to eat you, but that's not what's happening here." Vyra froze. Did he just say that? Did he honestly think she believed he wasn't going to do what every other human had done? Eat her, drink her blood, take her organs, whatever they wanted. She had seen it happen before. The humans weren't merciful, and they never had been. The human took a step back and pressed a button on a panel. The cage door opened with a mechanical hiss. Vyra tensed, her body ready to spring into action. But he didn't make any move to grab her. Instead, he reached inside a compartment in the wall and pulled out a small bowl, handing it to her cautiously. You need food and water. You've been through a lot." Vera stared at the bowl, then back at him, utterly confused. Was this a trick? Was this part of some human ritual? She had heard that they played mind games with their prey before they finished them off. "What's your game?" she asked, her voice steady, but her fear was evident. She had to be careful. Marcus seemed to understand her mistrust. "I don't have any game. I'm not here to harm you," he said again, his tone firm but not unkind. "I just want to make sure you're okay." Vera slowly took the bowl from his hand, though she still didn't trust him. She would never trust a human, not after everything she had seen. But she couldn't deny the strange feeling in her chest. This human, this Captain Marcus, was different from the others, and for the first time since her capture, she allowed herself to feel the tiniest spark of hope. Vera couldn't believe what had just happened. The human had opened her cage and handed her food. That never happened. Not in any story, not in any of the teachings passed down through her people. Humans were always the predators, and she was the prey. So why hadn't this human, Captain Marcus, done what the others had done? Why hadn't he treated her like an animal to be devoured? The food in her hands felt warm. It smelled like something she had never encountered before, unfamiliar and strange. She glanced at the human again. He was watching her carefully, his eyes calm, but not cold like the other humans she had encountered. This man wasn't a savage hunter. His eyes didn't gleam with hunger or malice. There was something different about him. "Eat," he said softly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "You need it." Vera stared at the food, the bowl trembling in her hands. She wanted to throw it back at him, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the exhaustion that was weighing her down, or perhaps it was the odd trust she felt. Despite herself, she had to admit, the food looked harmless, and her body screamed for sustenance. Slowly, she took a small bite. The taste was unlike anything she had ever had before. Rich, soft, and filling. It didn't taste like any kind of meat she knew, but something more pleasant, almost sweet. She took another bite, unsure of why she was even allowing herself to. Marcus stepped back slightly, as if giving her space. He didn't seem eager to watch her, but his gaze remained on her, observant and patient. "Thank you," she murmured after a long silence, barely loud enough for him to hear. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him, and the words surprised her. She hadn't meant to say them, but something in the moment felt different. "You're welcome," he replied, his tone still soft. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." Vera looked up at him, her mind swirling with questions. Was this a trick? Was he trying to gain her trust before he killed her? Or was he really different from the other humans? She couldn't understand it. He didn't act like a predator. But what else could it mean? The humans had always taken, always killed. She had seen it countless times. Yet this human, Captain Marcus, he was doing none of that. She set the bowl down, unable to finish it, and leaned against the cold wall of her cage. Her body felt heavy, weighed down by fear and confusion. There was no way she could trust him. No way she could trust any human. She had to be careful. They were all dangerous, all capable of betrayal. "Why haven't you hurt me?" Vera asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Her voice was still thick with disbelief. "Why are you being kind?" Marcus took a moment before answering, as if he had been waiting for the question. "Because I believe we don't have to be enemies," he said quietly, his voice steady. "I know what your kind thinks of humans, but I want to prove that we don't all follow the same path. We don't all believe in violence." Vera's mind spun. Could it be true? Was this just some game he was playing with her, or was he serious? She had heard humans speak like this before, but it was always a trick, a way to make the alien lower their guard. That was how the predators worked. The prey always thought it could trust them, right before the humans attacked. "Why are you doing this?" Vera asked, narrowing her eyes. "Are you trying to get something from me? What do you want?" I don't want anything from you, Marcus said, his voice firm yet patient. I'm just trying to do what's right. I'm not like the others. I don't want to hurt you. Vera studied him carefully. She couldn't read his face, but there was no deceit in his eyes. In fact, there was something she couldn't quite place. It was kindness, compassion. She wasn't sure. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. This will help you sleep. You've been through a lot, and you need rest. He handed it to her gently, as if he feared she might pull away. Vira hesitated. She didn't trust any of the humans, but her body, weakened by fear and hunger, longed for rest. She was so tired, and the device didn't look dangerous. She took it cautiously from his hand and placed it beside her. Sleep if you want. I'll be here when you wake up, Marcus said, turning to leave the cage. As he walked out, the door slid shut, and Vera was left alone once again. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel as suffocating. Her mind buzzed with questions, and yet, for the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. She lay down, her body too tired to resist any longer. The device Marcus had given her was calming, and despite herself, her eyelids grew heavy. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the doubts and fears that gnawed at her. Could this human be different? Could she trust him? Or would she wake up to find herself betrayed? Her last thought before sleep overtook her was that for the first time since her capture, she wasn't entirely certain that her fate was sealed. Days passed in a quiet rhythm aboard the ship. Vera couldn't say exactly how long she had been in the cell, but it felt like time had slowed. Her wounds had healed, and she was no longer as weak as she had been when she first arrived. The food Marcus brought her was always fresh and filling, and though she was still wary, her trust in him was slowly growing. Marcus continued to visit her every day, always bringing something new: tools, supplies, even books. Sometimes he would sit down and talk with her, asking about her home planet, her people, and the way her kind lived. He didn't treat her like an animal or a prisoner, but as someone with a history and a story. The more she talked, the more she began to feel like maybe humans weren't all the same. Maybe Marcus wasn't the only one who was different. But that thought still gnawed at her. Was it all just a trick? Was he only trying to gain her trust so he could use it against her? It was hard to let go of that fear, especially when her instincts told her that humans were nothing but predators. Still, there was something about Marcus that didn't sit right with the way she had been taught to view them. One afternoon, Marcus opened the cage door with his usual calm. He had brought her another meal, but this time, he also had something else in his hands. "Vera, I want to show you something," he said, his voice gentle as he stepped inside. Vera tensed slightly, but she held her ground. The last few days had shown her that he wasn't as dangerous as she had first thought. Still, she wasn't foolish enough to relax completely. Marcus lowered the object in his hands, a small, shiny device. It was unlike anything Vira had ever seen before. The human held it up, showing it to her with a careful smile. "This is a communication device," he explained. "It's connected to my ship's systems. With it, you can contact anyone. Ask questions, get information, whatever you need." Vera narrowed her eyes, suspicion rising. "Why are you giving me this?" she asked cautiously. "You want me to speak to your people, to give them information?" "No," Marcus said quickly, shaking his head. "It's not for that. It's for you, Vera. You have the right to know what's going on, to ask questions if you need to. I know I'm not your enemy, but I understand if you're still uncertain. If you want to talk to someone else, you can." Vera stared at the device, her mind racing. She had never been given a choice before. She had been captured, imprisoned, and treated as nothing more than a prize. The idea of being able to communicate freely, to ask questions without fear of punishment, it felt so foreign to her. "Why would you do this?" she asked softly, her voice filled with doubt. "Why give me the power to talk to anyone, to ask questions? Most humans don't let their prisoners do such things." Marcus sat down on the floor beside her, his eyes kind but firm. Because I trust you. I'm not your enemy, and I'm not trying to control you. I'm giving you the choice because it's the right thing to do. I want you to feel like you have some control over your life again. Vira's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know if she could trust his words, but the way he spoke, so honest, so genuine, made her pause. She had always been taught to fear humans, to assume the worst in them. But Marcus was different. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. He wasn't just trying to trap her. "Why did you rescue me, Marcus?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why save someone like me? What do you want from me?" Marcus looked down at the floor for a moment, clearly thinking. When he spoke again, his voice was steady but full of emotion. "I don't want anything from you, Vira. I'm not saving you for some reward. I'm doing it because I can, because I believe in doing what's right, and I want to prove that humans can be better than what we've been. I want you to know that not all of us want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you." Vira didn't know what to say. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. She wanted to believe him, but how could she? She had seen too much, endured too much pain at the hands of other humans. How could one person change that? How could he be different from all the others? But as she looked at Marcus, something shifted inside her. Maybe it wasn't about him being different from the others. Maybe it was about her own ability to change, to stop living in fear. "You trust me," Vira said slowly, almost to herself. "And I think I trust you too." Marcus smiled, his eyes softening. "Thank you. I know it's not easy to trust someone after everything you've been through." Vira nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. The thought of trusting someone, especially a human, had always seemed impossible to her. But here she was, starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, not all humans were enemies. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. A future where she wasn't just a captive, but someone who could make her own choices. Maybe Marcus wasn't the key to her freedom, but he was showing her that there could be a different way, one that didn't involve violence or hatred. And that thought gave her hope. Hope that there could be peace, not just between her people and the humans, but inside herself. Vira sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small communication device in her hands. It had been a few days since Marcus had given it to her, and every time she looked at it, her heart raced with uncertainty. She had thought about using it many times, but doubt always held her back. What if she was making a mistake? What if using the device would lead to something worse? Marcus had continued to treat her with kindness, bringing her food, talking to her, and even explaining things about Earth and human culture. He never once pressured her, never once forced her to trust him. His patience was something she didn't understand, but it made her question everything she had been taught. But now, the choice was becoming harder to ignore. Marcus had told her she could use the device whenever she wanted, to talk to anyone she chose. He said it was her right, to ask questions, to seek answers. Yet Vira still hesitated. She didn't know who to trust anymore. She had been a prisoner for so long, and the world she had once known felt like a distant dream. Could she really begin to make decisions on her own again? The silence in the room was thick with tension as she sat with the device in her hands. She wanted answers. She needed answers. Her thoughts were a storm of conflicting emotions, but one thing was certain. She didn't want to remain in this cage forever. She couldn't. Her eyes flicked to the door, where Marcus usually appeared. She heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching, and within moments, he entered the room. As always, he smiled at her, but today there was a different look in his eyes, something almost like concern. "Hey, Vira," he said, stepping closer. "How's it going?" She looked up at him, her face unreadable. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice low, "about the device you gave me." She hesitated for a moment, gathering her courage. "I don't know if I can trust anyone outside this ship. How do I know they're not going to use me for something else?" Marcus paused, sitting down beside her. His expression softened. I understand your fear, he said quietly. I know you don't trust humans, and I don't blame you. But I can promise you this, no one is going to harm you. Not as long as I'm here. Vira's heart fluttered at his words, but the old wariness didn't fade completely. But you're just one human, she said, her voice thick with doubt. You can't protect me from everyone. I don't know what to believe anymore. Marcus looked at her, his gaze steady and warm. You don't have to decide everything right now. You can take your time. But when you're ready, you can make your own choices. You deserve that. Vera swallowed hard. She had spent so long thinking of herself as powerless, as someone who had no say in her own fate. The idea of being able to choose, of having control over something again, felt almost foreign. But there was a spark in her, something that made her want to believe Marcus. For once, she wanted to take the risk and make a choice for herself. I want to use the device, Vera said, her voice firm with determination. I want to know who else is out there. I want to see if there's someone I can talk to. Someone who might be able to help me understand what's really happening. Marcus nodded. That's a big step, Vera. But I'll be here if you need anything. With a deep breath, Vera activated the device. She had never used it before, and she was unsure what to expect. The screen flickered to life, displaying a simple interface with several options. Messages, contacts, and a live communication link. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the screen. Finally, she pressed the button for a live connection. The screen shifted, and for a moment, nothing happened. But then, a face appeared. It was another human, but this one was different. She was an older woman, her face lined with age and experience, her eyes sharp and knowing. She looked directly at Vera, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Hello, Vera," the woman said, her voice soft yet confident. "I'm Dr. Elena. I've been waiting for you to reach out. Marcus has told us about you." Vera's heart skipped a beat. She had expected some sort of trap, some kind of trick. But the woman on the screen seemed genuine, kind even. I don't know if I should trust you," Vera said, her voice trembling despite herself. "I've never met you before. How do I know you're not going to hurt me?" Dr. Elena's smile remained, but her eyes held a kind of sorrow, as though she understood the pain behind Vera's words. "I understand your fear," she said, "and I can't promise that everyone you meet will be kind, but I can tell you this. You are not alone. There are people out there who want to help you, people who are trying to make things right." Vera felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to believe her, but there was a part of her that still held back. Still, this was the first real chance she had to hear someone's voice, to speak with someone who wasn't trying to control her. "I don't know what's going to happen," Vera said, her voice soft, "but I'm willing to try." Dr. Elena nodded. "That's all we can do, Vera. Try, and we'll be here for you every step of the way." The connection ended shortly after that, leaving Vera staring at the blank screen. Her hands were trembling, but she couldn't help the small spark of hope that had ignited in her chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a future where she could be more than just a prisoner, a future where she could be free. Days passed, and Vera's life aboard the ship began to feel a little less lonely. Marcus was always there, helping her adjust, explaining the strange technologies around her, and making sure she had everything she needed. But what had once felt like a kind gesture now felt like an unspoken connection. He never made her feel like a burden, never tried to rush her. And for the first time in a long time, Vera found herself questioning everything she had believed about humans. But the question still hung over her. Could she really trust Marcus? Could she trust anyone? She had spent most of her life believing that all humans were dangerous, selfish beings. But Marcus had shown her kindness, patience, and a sense of honor she hadn't expected. Still, doubts lingered. She thought about the conversation with Dr. Elena. Her words were comforting, but could they be true? Could there really be others out there who would help her, who would want to help her. Vira sat by the small window in her room, staring out at the endless blackness of space. The stars twinkled, far away and mysterious, just like the future that stretched before her. For the first time in a long time, she was thinking about the possibility of a life beyond her past, a life where she could decide her own path. But that also meant taking risks, stepping into the unknown. Suddenly, there was a knock at her door. Vera turned to find Marcus standing in the doorway, a small smile on his face. "Hey, Vira, you doing okay?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her emotions were a tangled mess, and she didn't know how to sort them out. Every time she thought about the future, her heart beat faster, half with excitement, half with fear. "I've been thinking," Marcus continued, stepping inside. "You've made a lot of progress. You're asking questions, thinking for yourself. I know it's not easy. You don't have to rush anything, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Vera met his gaze. His words were kind, but there was something else behind them, something that made her feel vulnerable. She was so used to hiding her emotions, so used to being alone, that it was hard to let anyone in. Yet with Marcus, there was no pressure, no judgment, just understanding. "I'm trying to trust you," Vira finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just hard. I don't know how to stop being scared." Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a seat beside her, not too close but close enough to show he was there if she needed him. He understood that the fear wasn't something that could just go away overnight. It would take time. It would take patience. "I get it," he said softly. "It's hard to trust when the world has shown you nothing but pain. But you don't have to carry that alone. I won't make you do anything you're not ready for." Vira's heart clenched. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was a future where she could be free of fear, free of the past. But how could she? Everything she had known had been about survival, about staying hidden, about avoiding the worst of humanity. Could one person, one human, really change everything she had believed? Before she could respond, the door to the room slid open again. A soft chime sounded, and Dr. Elena's face appeared on a screen next to them. Vera jumped a little, surprised by the sudden interruption. But Dr. Elena smiled warmly at her. "Hello again, Vera," Dr. Elena said. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Vera blinked, a little caught off guard by the sudden communication. She hadn't expected to hear from Dr. Elena so soon, but the sight of her felt comforting. It was strange. Dr. Elena wasn't physically present, but it felt like she had a calming presence all the same. "No, it's fine," Vera said, standing up and walking closer to the screen. "I was just talking to Marcus." Dr. Elena's eyes flicked toward Marcus, and she gave a small nod in acknowledgement. "I just wanted to check in. I know it's not easy adjusting to everything that's happened, but you're doing well. You're not alone, Vera. I promise you that. There's a whole network of people who are on your side." Vira felt a surge of emotion. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she hadn't expected. She had been so alone for so long, even when surrounded by others. To hear that there were people who wanted to help, people who would stand beside her, was almost too much to process. "Thank you," Vera whispered. "I didn't think anyone cared." Dr. Elena smiled, her eyes gentle. "There are more people than you think who care, Vera. And you have the right to decide your own future. No one can take that from you." The words sank deep into Vira's heart. For the first time, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a choice to rebuild her life, to be something more than just a victim of her circumstances. She could start fresh. She could be the one who decided her fate. Marcus watched Vera closely, his expression unreadable. But in his eyes, there was a glimmer of something, hope, maybe, or relief, that she wasn't sure how to interpret. Vira turned to him, her voice steadier now. "I'm ready to try. I want to know more. I want to trust." Marcus smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I needed to hear." With Dr. Elena still on the screen, Vera took a deep breath. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was making a decision that was hers alone. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was taking control of her future. And it all started with trust. The ship hummed quietly as Vera stood by the viewport, gazing out into the vastness of space. The stars sparkled like tiny jewels scattered across the endless black sky. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't looking for danger. She wasn't wondering if the next shadow would be her enemy. Instead, she was thinking about her future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. Behind her, the soft footsteps of Marcus approached. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. She could always tell by the way his presence seemed to fill the space around her, calm and steady. "You've been quiet today," he said, his voice gentle. "What's on your mind?" Vera hesitated for a moment before she spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the future, about what I could do with it." She paused. "I didn't believe it before. I didn't think I could ever have a choice in anything. But now, I'm starting to see things differently." Marcus smiled softly and stepped closer, standing beside her at the window. He didn't say anything, just let the silence settle between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was a comfortable silence, filled with understanding. "You've come a long way," he said after a while, his voice full of admiration. "When I first met you, I never imagined you'd be standing here today, ready to take control of your life." Vera glanced at him, surprised by his words. She had never seen herself as strong or capable. She had always been the one running, hiding, surviving. But in this moment, surrounded by people who cared, she was beginning to see herself differently. Maybe she wasn't just a survivor. Maybe she was something more. "I still don't know what's ahead," she said quietly. "But I want to find out. I want to make my own decisions, not just live in fear." "You don't have to know everything right now," Marcus said, his voice steady and reassuring. "What matters is that you're choosing to move forward, and you're not doing it alone." Vera turned her head slightly to meet his gaze. His words felt like a promise, like a bond she hadn't realized was forming between them. It wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about partnership, about two people standing together against whatever the universe threw their way. "I'm ready," Vera said softly. "I'm ready to take that first step." Marcus nodded, a sense of pride in his eyes. "And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." The ship was nearing its destination, a place Vera had never seen before. The planet they were heading to wasn't like anything she had imagined. It wasn't the cold, desolate world she had come from. It was vibrant, full of life and possibilities. And it was here, on this strange new world, that Vera would begin her new life. As they prepared to land, Vera couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and fear. She had no idea what to expect, but she was no longer afraid of what might come. For the first time in years, she felt like she had control over her own fate. The ship's engines thrummed as it descended into the planet's atmosphere. The lights of the cockpit flickered on, casting a soft glow on Marcus and Vera as they sat side by side. Vera's heart raced in her chest, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was the beginning of something new. "This is it," Marcus said, his eyes on the controls. "We're almost there." Vera nodded, her eyes focused on the view outside the window. The planet below was breathtaking. Lush forests, sparkling oceans, and towering mountains stretched as far as the eye could see. It looked like a place of peace, of hope. "Do you think I can really build a new life here?" Vera asked, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus smiled at her, his eyes filled with certainty. "I know you can." The ship touched down with a soft jolt, the landing gear humming as it settled into the planet's surface. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, Vera heard the sound of the hatch opening. The air outside smelled fresh and earthy, different from the sterile atmosphere of the ship. Together, they stepped out into the sunlight. For Vera, it felt like the first time she was truly alive. As they stood there, looking out at the world before them, Vera realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a future now, a chance to rebuild her life. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She turned to Marcus, a smile on her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Marcus smiled back, his eyes warm. "No need to thank me. This is all you. You made it here." Vira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her past lift off her shoulders. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She would face it with strength, with hope, and with the support of the people who cared about her. And for the first time, she felt like she was truly free. Vira awoke to the soft hum of the ship's machinery and the strange, almost comforting silence that filled her cage. At first, she didn't know where she was. Her mind was clouded by the dreams of her capture, the nightmares of being taken by humans. But slowly the memories returned, and she remembered the food, the kindness, and the soft voice of Captain Marcus. She blinked several times, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light of the cell. Her body still felt heavy, but the exhaustion had lifted somewhat. The warmth of the sleep aid Marcus had given her had worked its magic, soothing her tense muscles and calming her mind. For the first time since she had been captured, she didn't feel like she was in constant danger. She sat up slowly, her eyes scanning the small cell. The food bowl was empty now, and the walls of the cage felt less cold than before. It was as though the harsh reality of her situation had softened just a little. Vera's thoughts were still clouded, but there was one thing she knew for certain. Captain Marcus was unlike the others. The door to the cage slid open, and she instinctively tensed, her body ready to spring into action. But when she saw who it was, she relaxed. It was Marcus again. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice as calm as ever. I feel better," Vira replied, surprised at how honest her answer sounded. There was no fear in her voice, only curiosity. Why did this human care? Why was he treating her like this? "I'm glad to hear that," Marcus said, taking a few steps closer. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about why I'm helping you. It's not just because you're my prisoner. I've seen enough of my people do terrible things to others, and I'm not proud of that." Vira's mind was racing. She had never met a human who admitted to such things. It was almost as if Marcus was ashamed of what his people had done, and the thought made her pause. Could there really be humans who were different? Could there be someone who saw her as more than just a means to an end? "Why do you help?" Vera asked, her voice quieter now. "Why are you so different from the others?" Marcus paused, his expression thoughtful. He looked down at his hands for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I was raised to believe that strength comes from being kind, from doing what's right, even when it's hard. I don't want to be part of the cruelty. I don't want to make things worse." Vira watched him carefully, trying to understand. His words didn't match the stories she had heard about humans. They weren't supposed to care. They weren't supposed to show kindness. They were supposed to be predators. But Marcus, he didn't act like one. For the first time since her capture, Vera felt a small spark of something she hadn't expected: hope. She had always believed that humans were all the same, all dangerous. But maybe there was a chance, just a small one, that Marcus was telling the truth. "You're not like the others," she said softly, almost to herself. Marcus smiled slightly, though his expression was still serious. "No, I'm not. And I don't want you to think all humans are the same. Not all of us are out to hurt others." Vira didn't know what to say. Her mind was still tangled with confusion and doubt, but something about Marcus' honesty made her heart stir. She had been taught to fear humans, to expect violence at every turn. And yet here was a human who was offering something completely different, something that felt real. "Why do you trust me?" Marcus asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence between them. Vera tilted her head, unsure of how to answer. Why did she trust him? She didn't know. Not exactly. She wasn't supposed to trust him, not after everything that had happened. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in the others: genuine care. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice softer than before. "But I don't feel like you're going to hurt me." Marcus nodded, as though he had expected that answer. "I won't hurt you. You have my word." Vira's gaze flickered over his face, studying him for a moment. His words were simple, but they carried weight, and for some reason, she believed him. The silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of understanding, of two beings from different worlds sharing a moment of connection. "I've been thinking about what you said," Marcus finally spoke again. "That we can't all be the same. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to find a way to help you, Vira." Vira looked up at him, her heart beating a little faster. "Why?" she asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Why do you want to help me?" "Because I believe that helping you is the right thing to do," Marcus said simply. "And because I don't want to be the kind of human who takes without giving. I want to do more than just survive. I want to make things better." Vira was silent, her mind racing. Could this really be possible? Could she trust this human? She didn't know the answer yet. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She wasn't just a victim. There was a chance that, with Marcus, things could be different. And for the first time since she had been captured, Vera allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, not all humans were the enemy.